Hey, Tiffany, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, so it's good to have you here. We were just talking, you're in London right now, but where are you from? And maybe could you tell us a little bit about, your backstory and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of people say, well, you should write a book or this should be a movie. It's been quite a journey, which is amazing. It's been quite an adventure. So I'm from um originally Cleveland is where I was born. And then I've lived all over the States the whole middle part of my life. I lived out west. So I had this period of my life where I lived on a farm and had ostriches and um yeah, just rode horses and did all kinds of really cool stuff there. That was a neat part of life. um and then went back east to go to college, and then ended up like living in upstate New York for a long time,
What part?
um in Syracuse.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we're, you know how they call upstate, like anything that's 5 minutes north of New York City,
Yes.
So I'm
Yeah.
technically upstate. I'm about 30 minutes from the city, in a little town called Nyack, but Syracuse is still a good 5 hours from here, probably.
Yeah, I do know Nyack though. I've been
Yeah.
there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so I ended up in Syracuse for a good amount of time, like I guess about 18 years really. There was a brief period where I lived in Boston for some of that, but I owned a couple yoga studios actually when I was in Syracuse. So I started a small yoga studio, and that grew over the years. Um, yeah, and then, well, actually, I'll kind of start with the journey. Actually, I'll pick up from the journey there. So I did a lot of things up until that point,
Okay.
but a lot of stuff in business, and my career path had been kind of winding. The thread always being, though, service to others of some sort, through higher ed administration and teaching and different roles in business. But ultimately was also at the same time as my career journey was winding, also my health journey was like this. So there was this parallel story going on with my health, which was that at age 17, I had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, Crohn's. Um, and so that really, I say they're sort of like separate journeys in parallel, but they influenced one another,
Hmm.
and so when I was diagnosed at 17, it was a time when there was no, well, there wasn't internet, there wasn't cell phones, there wasn't, you couldn't just Google and find information about any of this stuff, health stuff. And
Sure.
and I was just facing a lot of medication. I was on a lot of medication. I had a lot of hospitalizations, and the doctors at the time were telling me basically like the best I could do was try to just manage from flare up to flare up. They told me nothing that I did mattered, nothing that I ate mattered. I couldn't change it at all. And I just had to take medication. Probably was facing a bunch of surgery at some point, but just like to get on with my life. So, as this path was winding and I was trying to figure out like things with work and career, I was also trying to do a lot of research and figure out ways to help my health, because it just didn't make sense to me intuitively that things that I ate weren't somehow affecting what was going on in my gut, because Crohn's is primarily like a digestive, it's affecting your digestive tract, primarily is where you feel it. So that eventually led me to yoga. So through, trying different diets and just sort of exploring and experimenting with different modalities that of healing, or, somebody would say like eat vegan, eat raw, I just tried everything, macrobiotics, but eventually yoga came into my life because somebody suggested that might help with like the pain and, just some of the, like, I was having a lot of joint swelling at the time. So I ended up doing yoga, which became profound for me. And that really set the course for this next phase of holistic healing ultimately, because what I did notice when I did yoga was that I was experiencing less symptoms, and I was going longer in between flare ups. And so I started to understand this mind body connection a
Right.
lot more. And
Which
so,
probably, not to interrupt,
yeah,
but which
no, no,
probably
no.
just made you think like, maybe I should trust that intuition a little bit more, right? I mean, because all the
Yeah,
doctors had said nothing's going to work, and you're like,
yeah,
nothing?
yeah.
Okay. And you kept trying things, and now finally something's like working, which I don't know. If I'm in your shoes, I'm probably going to lean a little bit more in now to, not experimental, but like unusual treatments, right? Or something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was so blown away by the change, that like I really felt so much better and the pain was so much less. And like I said, it was going longer and people were noticing. They were noticing the change. They were noticing I'd kind of gotten this like vibrancy back and I'd gotten this energy back that I hadn't had in a long time. And so I knew there was a connection there. And so, yes, exactly. I was like, you know what? I'm going to trust my intuition because I just believe that my body wants to find some balance and some healing. And I'm not going to give up until I figure this out. And so, really took a deep dive with yoga and eventually decided to open a yoga studio in Syracuse. So left the corporate world. I was actually at that point, my trajectory I thought was going to be like continuing to move up in administration in universities because that's the work I was doing. I was doing like that kind of stuff. And so I opened these yoga studios and that just continued to bring a lot more of the holistic healing aspects to my life. But I still wasn't, I was still on medication, but yoga and these other things were helping. And I was
Right.
going longer and longer without like, having any issues. Um, but then sort of a turning point was in 2019. I was leading a yoga retreat and I had been, they can tell with these things that they can tell when these autoimmunes are in remission. So they're active, there's markers, but they're in remission. So it had been really quiet. I had actually come off of medication. And then I was on my way to lead a yoga retreat and on the airplane, on the way there, it came back full force, like rampant. It was by the time I got to Costa Rica, I should have been hospitalized. I was like really, really sick.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I actually had to turn around and go back to New York and go in the hospital. And that was like the key pivotal turning point moment for me where I was like, I had, along the years, I had started collecting a lot more information. People were talking about functional medicine and, people like Dr. Mark Hyman and all of these, amazing functional MDs they were on the scene. They were talking about this stuff and I knew of them, but I was like, well, I'm good. Uh, but what was happening was I actually wasn't really taking care of myself. So I was running these big businesses. They had gotten quite large. I had a large staff of like 75 people and a couple locations, and I wasn't taking care of myself at all. And
Right.
so the train was absolutely going to come off the tracks. Like I say, it kind of came out of nowhere, but it didn't come out of
It
nowhere.
was a
Like
slow build. It was like
it
behind the
was,
scenes, and
yeah.
it's like if you were looking, you would have saw it, but you just like weren't looking, right?
Yeah, I have
Because
blinders on. I was just
yeah,
like,
no
everything's
news is
fine.
good news. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just gonna keep moving
yeah.
and everything's fine. So it was at that time landing in the hospital that I was like, right, okay, now this is serious and everything has to change. And I have to. I know there's information out there. I know I have pieces of the puzzle and I need to figure out the rest of the pieces because I want to heal and I don't want to go back on medication. And so that really fueled my fire to go deeper into study. So I started studying a functional medicine approach. I started doing schooling while I was working on healing myself and just sort of understanding the blend. Like I said, I had collected like all these tools and bits, and then I started to understand how they all came together to promote balance and harmony. And it included lifestyle changes. Like I had to take care of myself. I had to change my
Right.
lifestyle. So I sold the yoga studios and and then I went back into corporate America. And so, but that was a really intentional choice. Like I was working on these degrees, I was studying the functional medicine, I was healing. Um, I wanted to be in roles where I could help people. Um,
And maybe
I
without all the stress of like ownership
Yeah,
and stuff like that, kind of clock in, clock out a little bit.
absolutely. I was like, you know what? I want to give my all to my job during the day, but I can't have this extending into my evenings and my weekends, and I need space for
Right.
myself. So yeah, I did that for a couple years while I was studying all of this stuff. And so I ended up back in in your world. I ended up by a weird swirl of events, the way it happens, but I was ended up in people operations in like remote tech companies. Specifically ended up being my niche, and then was doing that for many years while I was like, studying all of this. And then eventually, I fully healed everything. And at that point, I actually had 5 different autoimmune diagnoses. because they just sort of like snowball.
Wow.
So, and then the difference being that this time they are clinically gone versus how they would see
Remission.
them in remission before. Yeah. So there was, I got to the point where they were like, there's no clinical evidence of these anymore. And I was like, okay.
Wow.
So yeah. And then it was like, well, I have to help others. I mean, I figured out all these pieces and, it just felt like this was my next path. So launched my business and have been helping people since.
And do you do that mostly through like one-on-one coaching or through like seminars, or like how do you get the material across?
Right now the last couple of years I've been only doing one-on-one coaching and I work with people. We start with 4 months and then that's generally like the program. And then I offer some follow-up support, like as they continue on their healing journey. Yeah, I'm creating a new program actually as we speak that should be launched by the end of July. And I'm going to also offer like a group coaching model as well. But yeah, basically like I just take people through, I do the functional testing, but it's all the layers. So
Right.
this piece that I was saying, like all these layers that I collected over the years, it's like, yes, it's nutrition and it's lifestyle, but it's also, it's like the emotional healing,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's all of it. You have to address all the layers because,
It's like
um,
it's a full
yeah,
integration. It's like I mean, your body can be well, but if your mind isn't right, it's just going to send your body back there, right? Or
absolutely.
so when people come to you, because I saw that, I feel like any almost anybody could be a client, I would think, but it seems like you kind of market towards the people that are like high achievers, super busy. So I'm guessing a lot of the stuff you have is like, I just don't have any energy and I don't know what's wrong because I'm getting on my treadmill every day and I'm doing all the stuff, right? And I'm
Yeah,
pissed,
yeah, yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
type A's, I would think,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's my target because that was me.
okay.
And that's just where my heart's at because, you know, I see it and I see the struggle and and also there's this layer for me of like I want people because then I started hearing the messaging for people with that like really driven personality, that type A, like go-getters, they want to achieve a lot and they're capable of achieving a lot and they do great stuff, right? But they just get so burned out and so worn out and they sacrifice their health for the drive.
Yeah.
The message I was getting when I started to explore that was like, well, you basically it was just like, well, you just have to stop that life. It's almost just becomes like an all or nothing message where it's like you just have to like you shouldn't have as many goals and you have to just kind of like meditate all day and you can't live this life, of like um, this like really driven career or a business or something like that. And I was like, you know what? I don't think that's true, actually.
Right.
I think there's a middle way. And so what I started to realize is how to shift for myself, and take care of myself and do the right, like make the biggest impact, to get myself well, which then in turn made me more productive, more creative, and more fulfilled. And I was like, oh, I'm actually achieving more.
Totally.
And yeah, and so then I'm like, I want all those high achievers to like understand they don't have to sacrifice. It's not one or the other. They can
Right.
have their health, they can have these like energetic lives, without killing themselves for it and still do all the things they want to do. And
And
so that
maybe
just
more, like
became,
you're saying. It's
yeah,
almost like the
yeah.
analogy of like, even a race car like pulls over to get like the tires changed and everything. And it's like, I
Hmm.
think, and I've been on the wrong side of that. I mean, for sure. I think most driven people have been on the wrong side of this equation, or live there. I mean, I lived there for a long time, I think, where, you become so goal obsessed that it's like, well, everything else, including my personal health and everything, is going to take a back seat to this thing. And I'll get to the rest when I can get to it. But it never feels good when you get there because you don't feel good. And maybe your relationships are out of balance and maybe you're not dealing with the stuff you need to be dealing with. And I love what you're doing because it's, first of all, I think anybody that's in that space, again, I think everybody's been in that space I mean, I don't think we were born out of the womb with the skill set to just be like, I know how to keep myself in perfect balance, like all the time, right? I mean, I think we all just get out of
Yeah.
balance. And I think the faster you're running and the harder you're charging and the longer you're doing it, those maybe some bad habits got ingrained, right? And it's like, but I think through your own journey, it's like, but you don't have to take hypothetically, 20 years to unravel it. Like maybe you can do it a lot faster by learning from you what you learned along the way, right?
Yeah.
So when they come to you, and again, guessing some of the most common things are, hey, I'm doing well in this area, but I just feel burnt out. I'm always tired. You said you go into kind of looking at the functional parts first. Do you mean like is the nutrition like one of the first things you check? Is it sleep? Like what are kind of the, I don't know, I guess the foundational pillars for you of finding out what's going on with that person?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of course, it is going like what I find is going to be really individual. That's why I like, working the way that I do with
Yeah.
this. We always go into assessment first because here's the thing with the body, when anything's out of whack, everything's out of whack. And sometimes there are areas that are louder than others, and those are the ones we pay attention to, but the body doesn't segment and separate itself that way. So I know if somebody's saying that they're really fatigued, maybe they're having issues with their gut or weight, but they're like, but my hormones are fine. I'm like, well, probably not actually. I mean, all these systems are affecting one another. And so what I'm looking at is I'm doing a deep analysis. So the first step always is a really extensive assessment. I'm asking questions that you've never even thought like somebody would ask you. And I have a bunch of different tools that I do assessments. And then I'm looking for what I call our hidden stressors, because sometimes we just don't even realize some of the things that are contributing. And so my role is that what I see is that I'm like this detective. I'm this objective observer. I'm this detective, and I'm going to see things that probably you don't even see. And so then I'm getting a full picture of like, then my approach then to answer your question is, because for every person it's different what's contributing to then the outcome of the symptoms. I'm going to look for what are the things that we're going to have the biggest impact quickly, and we're actually going to focus on those first because that keeps people going.
Sure.
So if it is nutrition, because I'm just saying that because sometimes people come to me and they actually have their nutrition really dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that may not be the right place to start because they tell me what they're eating and I'm like, actually, that's not really the problem. So we've got to figure out what is the problem. Whereas somebody else, like they are doing everything else right, but they're like, they're like what they're nourishing themselves with is crap and it's not really nourishment. So then I will likely start there. So it just kind of depends on what I see is like the biggest opportunity for healing
Right.
initially, because I want people to have success quickly, feel better quickly, so that they keep going.
Well, I
Because
also,
there's a lot of layers, and we got to get the wins in first.
well, yeah, and I also have to think maybe incorrectly, but it kind of seems to me intuitively that in this area, like a rising tide lifts all boats a little bit, right? Like, so
Yes.
if the thing was nutrition, and that makes a dent right away, that gives them energy, that helps with their weight, that helps with, right? So it's like all
Yes.
like a domino effect with all those things.
Yes, you said it perfectly. And that's exactly because that's what I'm saying. Like it's also interconnected that you're never going to isolate one thing from the other. So if we go to the source of like what's going to, yeah, like make the biggest impact, and then everything else will start to fall into line and balance. And then we can start to tweak and fine tune and then look at the other layers because a lot of times, um, like we mentioned earlier, it's like the nutrition, the physicality, the exercise, the sleep, those are the obvious things. And people want to focus, especially doers, especially achievers. They're like, how can I do nutrition harder and better? How can I work out harder and better? Like, I'm just going to crush my sleep goals. It's
Yeah.
like, well, all right. But then there's this layer of like the mindset and the
Right.
mentality, and maybe like what is going on in your life over here that's causing those choices.
Sure. And you're
Because
still
we can
going,
fix that, but then you're going to go right back to something else because you haven't actually addressed this.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
just going
Yeah.
extreme in a different area
Yeah.
now. The
Totally.
same thing that got you here. It's funny. Uh, Gosh, I guess it's been about 10 years now, but so my wife had been going to yoga for a long time. This probably started in the mid to late 2000s, right? She was going to yoga. And, I could see like how great it was for her. She was just like lit up when she got home, and actually not even lit up, like kind of zenned out, right? Like just
Yeah.
peaceful, right? And I thought it was really cool, and she'd always ask me if I wanted to go, and I'd be like, "No, I'm not going. I'm too busy. I have important things. Can't go lay around on the ground and stretch." And I went to a personal development seminar, and like a light bulb went on, and she was always asking me in a really nice way. It was never any pressure. It was always just like, "Would you like to go? I think you'd really like it." And I'd be like, "How many times is she going to ask that?" She asked like 50 times, I think I went once on like Mother's Day or something,
Yeah.
and just went out of obligation. But I was at this seminar, and I remember calling her from the seminar, and I went, God, I think I did like a thing where you had to kind of evaluate different areas of your life and figure out where you were out of balance.
Mm,
And for me, it was like, well, finance was pretty good, career was good, fitness was solid in some ways, yet I didn't feel the energy. But I mean, I was doing my workouts, right? So
yeah. Yeah.
I gave myself a decent score, but I wasn't feeling great. But then like spirituality and like some of these other things were just like
Yeah.
super low. And I went, God, that thing you've been asking me to do, I think there might be something to it. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do, again, overachiever, but it kind of worked in this case. Because I knew if I dabbled, it wouldn't do anything. So I said, I'm going to go. And when I get back, I'm just going to, I don't think I made this commitment yet, but I said, I'm going to go back and give it like an honest shot. I want to see what this is all about. Then I got in there, and you know how yoga studios will sometimes do like a 30-day challenge or
Yes, yes,
whatever,
yes. Yeah.
which I don't know how you feel about that, but it ended up working out really good for
Yeah.
me because I just went, I'll do that. I'll go. I mean, I've done, if it doesn't work out, I've definitely done dumber things for a month, so I'll do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, when I went in, I had just been done running a few marathons over the previous few years, and my body was just torn up. I mean, in my head, I was like, I'm never running distance. I mean, not even as a choice, just like I'm not running distance because I can't anymore. Like my body can't
Oh,
handle it.
yeah.
And I started going. I went every day for a month, and oh my God, the physical transformation was amazing, but the mental was crazy. And
Yeah.
we ended up going into teacher training a few months later and ended up becoming,
Really?
yeah, we ended up becoming teachers. And I taught up until COVID quite a bit, like, anywhere from 1 to 5 classes a week. And then my wife just started teaching out in New York again now. But it was such a good balance. I mean, the thing that's reminding me of it, I didn't mean to go on and on that story, but that was one of those cases where I went in going, oh, there's this, I'm going in for this one thing. I'm going in for this. To me, it was probably the spiritual thing. I was like, well, I'm not going to church to get it, right? Like, I'm
Right,
not
right,
wired that way. So
right.
I'll try yoga. So I went into it for the spiritual thing. And what I got was physical healing, mental calmness. Like, the spiritual thing came too.
Yeah, yeah.
Then I got contribution because I got to teach and give it back, right? And so there was just all these things that came from kind of tugging at that one thread. It was really cool.
I love that. I love that story so much. Like, and that's exactly, and that's the beauty of the layers of what I'm saying, like the layers of healing. And it's like, that was such an incredible illustration of like, it's, you can have so many things in place, but like if these other things are out of balance, like it's going to pull you off balance eventually. Like you
Right.
can sustain for so long, but you're not gonna have the energy, the clarity, like there's just gonna feel like something's missing. And then eventually what happens if you don't figure that out and you don't have all of these, pieces like aligned, um, it's gonna show up somewhere else,
Right.
something, so it's like this is why I work the way I do. And it's I see so many, of course, like amazingly. I love that there's so many holistic health coaches out there, and I see all these programs and I see all this stuff, and it's absolutely incredible. And I think we're moving in the right direction. But I do see this piece missing because so many of them are like, here's this 5-step program, and it's just nutrition and supplements, and it's like all this testing, nutrition and supplements, and then that's the solution. And it's like, well, that's really not. Like, it's part of it. It's really
Right.
important. But I also think like, okay, so let's talk about the yoga and the emotional and the spiritual and the mental. And it's like, that stuff actually, and I'm sure you can attest to this, when you're connecting with your body that way and all those layers are coming in harmony, you actually want to nourish your body in a better way. So then
Totally.
they end up coming hand in hand,
Yes.
where it's like, whereas if you're only focusing on like, here's my superfoods, here's my nutrients, I'm measuring everything, I'm going to take 50 million supplements and like biohack my way through life and get
Right.
on my treadmill under my desk and do the red lights. And, it's like, well, that's going to just take you're going to feel good for like a minute.
Right.
And then the train's coming off the tracks at some point and it's going to show up in another way. Whereas like you bring harmony of all these layers, that's the key.
Yeah.
Like that's the key for sustainable health as well. I mean, that's what we want, right? We don't
Yeah.
just want longevity. We want that quality of life. You don't just want to live longer. You
You don't
want to
want to
live
live. You don't
well.
want to. Yeah. You don't want to live poorly longer. That's just like
Right.
suffering. I mean,
Right.
But I heard you say, and I'll paraphrase this clip, but it was something around like the normal way. I'm adding, I think, to your clip, but anyway, my interpretation was this of your clip was you were talking about how high achievers that are having trouble getting stuff done, maybe because there's an imbalance, like what we're talking about. And then the answer typically is, oh, 7 ways to hack your productivity. Or,
Right.
and it's like, you don't need a hack to do more of what you've already been doing that's not serving you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
which, like you said, it might feel good for 5 minutes because if someone gives me a productivity hack and it saves me 30 minutes a day, that feels good till I
Yeah.
fill it up with the wrong stuff again. And I'm just back to where I started. Right.
Yes, yes, exactly. And, not to go like too deep down this rabbit hole, but it's
Yeah.
like you haven't examined the why. The why do you feel like the need for the busyness, for
Right.
the constant goals, for like never reaching? Because it sounds like you were the same as me. And many of us, it's like you reach that goal, right? You're just so driven. And then it's like you get there and it's just the next one and the next one and the next one. And when you don't have a gratitude practice or you haven't made space in your life for like understanding why you're even doing that, like what is the layer of that? And sadly, what I see is that over time, the body, it takes the toll on the body, and they know this now. I mean, there's so much science now; it's irrefutable that our emotions um, are affecting us on a cellular level.
Of
I mean, you
course.
can't, it's like The Biology of Belief is a book that a lot of people talk about, Dr. Bruce Lipton and, Dr. Joe Dispenza is doing a lot of science around there. There's so much science out there now. And it's like you can't separate our thoughts, our emotions are causing cellular change in our bodies. And yeah, I mean, kind of coming full circle, like what is the why and where are we going with this? And you're going to put all this stuff off, and then you're going to get to some critical point where you've achieved all that, and then you're
And then we're
sick.
sitting there going, yeah, I'm
Yeah, and you're not
unfulfilled. I
enjoying
feel
it. Yeah.
lousy.
Yeah.
And we feel ripped off because it's like, I did what I'm supposed to do. Like I
Right. I did
followed
all
the
the things.
playbook. Yeah. And I have, or maybe they reach financial success, but their
Yeah.
body's torn up or they're mentally not good. How much are you dealing with? I was talking to one coach and she had such a cool approach because I said, what's your first thing when you're meeting with a client? And this was more around, if I had to categorize her, I'd say a little bit more around mindset coaching, right? And most mindset coaches will say, well, we've all heard that quote, like if your why is big enough, then the how will come into play, which, listen, I think it plays a part, but I like what she said is she goes, I got to figure out their why not first. Like what's been preventing them the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
So in your world, how much do you have to get into like unpacking old wounds, trauma, limiting beliefs, whatever that is, before you guys can even move into like the I mean, I guess you can
Yeah.
still say, hey, eat right while we're talking about this stuff,
Yeah.
but you still got to unpack that stuff. How much of your work is around that kind of stuff?
Huge. So much.
Yeah.
So much. Yes. And I love what she said. And I agree with that. And it's like, and especially when it comes to health and healing and your beliefs around it. Because I've never had a person come to me who's at the beginning stage of not feeling well. They have been not
Right.
feeling well for so long. And it's like they say, well, I've always known, or I knew, and or this or that. And they come up with all these reasons, genetics and my life and whatever. There's a million excuses. And to that point, like the why not? Well, why not? Why didn't you address this sooner? Why didn't you? What is it? What is your belief that either you don't deserve radiant health, you don't have access to it, it's not possible, whatever. There's so many different reasons. We dive deep with that stuff because, over the years, I've become just convinced. I mean, my own experience and what I see with my clients is that's the make or break piece, actually. We have to get to that subconscious programming. We have to understand, yeah, hidden traumas, hidden stressors. That's why I say these hidden stressors. I mean, I do work with so I do a lot of the, like, of course, like really the functional. I work on both sides. This is what I tell
Right.
people. I blend Eastern and Western. I mean, there's a place for both of them. I work on the biology side and I work on the bioenergetic side. And then I see the circadian rhythm piece connecting the two, which is a huge passion of mine because that part's missing as well, and you can't separate it. But on the energetic side and the bioenergetic side, I actually have an assessment tool that will even look at like how your subtle energy is doing. And it always correlates with the biological tests, and it's like we've got to look at, I don't know, chicken or the egg, but does it matter? We just have to address it at the root. So that piece is, and this is where a lot of my training comes in. This is why I've done hypnotherapy training. And, I have a lot of different modalities and tools that I'll pull out because as we start to unpack these layers, I want to have different ways to help people clear that stuff,
Yeah.
with mindset, subconscious reprogramming, energy healing. I do energy healing as well. And, so we're working on, like I said, the biology and the bioenergetics. And then that's where the magic happens.
Have
Because,
you really
we're working on
noticed
both of it.
you've been in this? I mean, obviously since you were 17, since you were
Yeah.
diagnosed, but in the studying and or practicing in the field for what, 20 years now, something like that, or
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Have
I
you?
mean, yeah, it's been a long
It
time.
seems like in the last 10 though, maybe 5 even, the last few years that it was always like this type of conversation that we're having was over here. And then the real
Yeah.
doctors were over here, right? So it
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
you're either going to do the hippy dippy thing, which
Yeah.
99% of the population was like, that's whatever, that's just craziness, hocus
Yeah.
pocus. Or you're going to go see a doctor and you're going to get antibiotics and do whatever you're going to do over there. I feel like it's only been the last few years where those worlds have intersected in a way. Again, I'm outsider kind of, I guess, looking in. I mean, it's not my day to day, but I'm paying attention to it. And I'm like, because you guys have guys like Mark Hyman, you have
Yeah.
guys like Joe Dispenza, you have like
Yeah.
very popular, very respected people going there. Yeah, there is no separation
Yeah.
between like energy and how you're doing physically and how you're doing mentally, and they are all completely intertwined. And I don't think there's anyone really arguing that anymore. I think what people might have differences on is applications of different things, right? Where to go
Yeah.
next, but I don't think anyone's arguing the connection anymore.
No, I mean, I think you're right. And it's so encouraging to me because but you're right. It's like all of a sudden,
Yeah.
we're just back. And I was listening to this podcast today, actually, because I'm really down a rabbit hole, well, for years now, but with quantum everything, quantum biology, quantum like energy, quantum mechanics. Um, but she was actually talking about the history of like when this stuff got separated to begin with, because actually it always was together.
Right.
And then at some point, this was like Descartes, and and he wanted to like study the body and dissect the body, and the church said, okay, great, fine, but then you get the body, the physical body, and we get the soul. And it was like that was how they justified that you could dissect bodies. Like that
Okay.
was how that differentiation was made, so that everybody was comfortable with it. Um, and it never came back together
It's crazy.
until now,
What
right?
year
So
was
then the
that? Or when
body,
was that?
I'd have to look up the year, but
Yeah.
I'll send you the podcast. It was really, really good. And I'd heard it before. And actually in my yoga teacher training, the anatomy teacher, it was like triggering that he told this story of like why we started saying the body, like mechanically, this is like the elbow and the femur, the things, and it's like, there's the physical body and then there's the soul, and they are separate.
Right.
And it was literally just a practicality to
Right.
get around giving permission
It was
to
almost like
like,
politics. It was like,
yes,
oh, we
it
got to make the
was
other side feel good. So give
totally.
them a win. And like, let's
Yeah.
just, yeah.
It was totally politics. And then it's like, then it just, and that's her point was it's important for us to understand why we got to where we did and
Right.
why everything got so segmented and separated. But it is coming back together because you
Right.
can't argue it, you know, and
Right.
and now I think the cool thing now is that, like you said, there was this esoteric hippy dippy woo stuff. And then there was like the real science. And it's like, well, now the beauty is science is the common language that blends them because
Right.
we figured out how to scientifically measure the woo.
Right.
So it's like, so now we're speaking everyone's language and nobody can argue about it because it's like, well, can you measure it? Then yes, so great. Then we're all good. Can we get on with healing? Because we have all the things we
Scientifically,
need.
I like that. Scientifically measure the woo. That's a
Right.
good one. It's true though, because
Yeah.
then it takes the business community, the practical community or whatever, and goes, oh, okay. Like it's
Right.
kind of legit. I mean, if there's science
Yeah.
behind it, right? It's not just yoga teachers sitting on a mat making it up, right?
Right.
It's like there's
Right.
something real behind it. That's really, really cool. Well, so personally, right before we hit play, you said you're in London, right? How did you end up in
Yes.
Europe now recently? So how long have you
Yeah.
been in Europe and what's going on? Because it sounds like you have this amazing life now where you can just kind of go where you want and work remotely. But what does that look like for you these days?
Yeah. So, well, I'll start with this. I started traveling a bit more last summer. My son was 18, graduated. Like, so I just, was kind of going into a different stage of life. Um, did some travel adventures. I did a Wim Hof expedition and just some other things, I was doing just kind of traveling again, doing like yoga retreats and like that kind of stuff. And just started meeting really cool people that were all around the world. And essentially, um, in those conversations, I would say like, oh, I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to go and like live somewhere else and live abroad and travel. And they were like, well, why don't you?
Yeah.
Like what is stopping you? Like you just need your computer because I work with all my clients virtually and I was already working with people everywhere. And so it just became a question of like, well, why aren't I doing the thing that I said I always wanted to do? So I came, yeah, I started kind of like visiting places and then realized like, and then there were some practitioners here that I wanted to work with. I mean, um, I just started to like interact with a bunch of really cool people. You know how it does in this,
Yeah.
like when you're networking and then you just meet really cool practitioners and people. And I just saw the opportunity to like try and see. So yeah, I'm like traveling around a bunch as I was sharing with you. I've been all over at this point. I went to since I've been so I came to London in December. And since then, let's see, I've been to Denmark, Italy, Greece, going to Portugal. I'm going to be teaching yoga for a retreat in Scotland in November. And I mean, just all these opportunities are starting to come. So
Yeah.
I'm just like embracing that. And it's what I tell
Nice.
people. And this is what I love about it is like I do feel like um part of well, just this is a reflection from what people tell me, just the story of my life and my journey. It's like I'm living it. I'm living it out loud and it does seem to help people understand, because we talk about this like with my healing journey, with where I'm at in life right now, like that didn't happen overnight.
Hmm.
At some point over here, I said, this is what I want. Like, this is how I want my life to feel. This is what I want it to look like. And then you start to take small actions consistently and keep moving in that direction until you realize the dream, the goal, the outcome. And that's what happened with my health. That's what happened with my lifestyle. And I hope that encourages people to like, that's the piece. It's like, you have to see the end part that you want. And then you take these small, actionable, consistent steps towards it.
Yeah.
And
But
you
that
do then
requires
eventually get there,
but that requires patience, which a lot of people
Yes.
don't have, right? I mean, we all want
Yeah.
it. It's like, oh, I only moved 0.5% in the right direction. It's like, yeah, but in
Yeah.
200 days, that means you'll be there. And it's like, no, that everybody wants it like now,
I
but
know.
I agree with you. It's like and, Going back to what you were saying earlier about the set a goal, make it, set another one. Check out a TED talk by a guy named Sean Aker. It's
Okay.
exactly what we're talking about. It's called The Happy Secret to Better Work, I think is what it's called.
Okay.
That's what my brain just told me it's called. It might be off. The
Okay.
Happy Secret to Better Work. And he talks specifically about that, like how we are geared towards setting goals. Can't be happy till the goal is reached, because why would you be happy? That's not the outcome, right? You got to hit the outcome. And then we hit it, and we set another one, we set another one, we set another one. If we don't learn how to appreciate the journey, we're never going to be fulfilled. But he does it in a very entertaining, very funny, and very impactful, at least for me, because I've recommended it a bunch.
Oh, great.
TED
Okay.
Talk. Yeah, it's really
Oh,
good.
awesome. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
check it out. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to make sure that we put all the ways to get in touch with you. I'm imagining, since you're traveling so much, that you're mostly meeting with clients like this, right? On Zoom?
Yes. Yes. It's all on Zoom. You can schedule directly with me on my website. That's the easiest thing because it just pulls up my calendar. I always have a one-on-one call with people. Just to like see where they're at, what they want, like, how I can help. Um, that's complimentary. I take a good amount of time and just like talk to people about where they're at and explain how I work. And, it's really important to me that it's a good fit. And I'm
Yeah.
very honest about that because I care deeply about people feeling well and living the life that they want. And, I want to make sure like if you can't tell, I'm very passionate about this. And like when I get in that container with people, I'm all in and I'm like,
Sure.
all right, this is where you want to go. We're going to get you there. But I need to make sure that they're also that committed, that this makes sense, that the way that I work works with what they want. And so we have that conversation because I don't ever want to like, engage, with somebody that like it's not the right fit. I'd rather send them in another direction if I think that,
Sure.
it's not, because I want people to have the outcomes they want and feel better. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that's what I encourage people to do. Like schedule with me. Let's have a conversation. Let's see if it makes sense. And then I just love to get people feeling better. Like I love that moment when a client, when I get that message and they're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
like where has this energy been my whole life? Almost, I would say, if I'm not exaggerating, I would say 90% of my clients end up saying, I didn't even know that you could have this much energy. Like
Right.
we get so used to this sort of fog that you don't even know until you get to the other side how like kind of foggy and fatigued you were. And they're like, I feel better now in my 40s, 50s, 60s than I did in my 20s.
Right.
And that was my experience as well. I was like, oh, like that, so I
Because they've
love
never
those moments.
accessed
Yeah.
that level before.
Yeah.
So, maybe it was there when they were in their 20s, but they never knew how to access it, right? So
Yeah.
this is all
Yeah.
like new territory, which is amazing that you're showing them that.
Yeah. So yeah, I love what I do and I love to help people get there. So
Very cool. Well, it's been great getting to know you a little bit, Tiffany, and I'm sure our paths will cross again. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
yeah, thank you for having me. It was great to chat.
You got it.